how should I present my company to an investor? How does the process work? How much time does it take? And what comes after the investment? Are those questions that you asked yourself already? I get them frequently from my mentees when I talk with them about how to present your company to investors. Today, we have the great opportunity to listen to one of Europe's most accomplished life science investors, Bruno Montanari from Sarova Life Science. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Christian. Welcome to all.
Bruno, one question I would like to ask you right away. I hear a lot of, interesting ideas how to become a life science investor. So one of those ideas is you need to make billions before and then you can become a life science investor. Is this really true? How is it to become a life science investor? What is necessary for that?
If this assessment was true, there wouldn't be a lot of VC investors, I guess. Maybe I would add, unfortunately. I mean, no, to become an investor, you can have a different background, and actually you come probably at different levels as well. In an established VC fund, you can think as well, actually, but this goes back to your point, having made a fortune before, you can become as well a business angel. Business angels are perfect investors as well to support the creation of companies and bring that to a level of maturity where institutional funding can be found. Actually, sometimes down to the finish line, which can be an M&A for an exit or a public listing. And so the profiles are very different. You can find people coming from a background like myself, some others from a consulting background, always obviously in our sector, healthcare. You have people having run companies, being professional as well. So it's very diverse, and as I said, you don't necessarily enter a VC fund at the same level given your previous experience. And you can be part of the core investment team, you can be an entrepreneur in residence, you can be a venture partner. You've got different shades of gray here in order to fulfill your role as an investor, which can be completed with maybe a slightly more operational role when you think about entrepreneur in residence or venture partner.
You mentioned that you can do two things. So there are two types of investors. One is the business angel and one is a venture fund.
Yeah.
Where do you see the difference between those two categories of investors?
But the business angel, they can act collectively through a group of such individuals, but usually they would tend to be very early at the inception of the company to put the first limited funding, more limited than what the VC institution can bring, especially since VCs syndicate together. I'm making a generalization here because you've got deep-pocketed BAs that actually can put dozens of millions in companies as well. But usually, what you will find is BAs that will put a few 100,000, maybe 1 or 2 million to start with, and try to put a company on track. So it's really the kind of friends and family money, if you want, and I would call it savvy funding when those PAs come from the pharma or medtech industry, because obviously then it goes just beyond initial support and love of entrepreneur or innovation. It's really there to add value with accessing network and making sure that the startup can tap into the experience of the PAs. So the VC funds are more institutionalized, more people, there's a process we go through. You need layers of due diligence analysis. It can be very often maybe less intuitive than what PAs can have the freedom to do, depending as well on the relationship. So it's I would say it's more, more process oriented, larger funding is different.
What is the point when you as a VC decide to take over the investment lead from the business angels? What is your ideal investment object?
Whether we take it from VAs or not, for us, and it will depend upon the investment thesis from one fund to the other. But for early stage funds, some of them can actually already be there with seed financing, or even what we call now pre-seed. You have more and more a business model for some VC funds where they would put the first money in the form of convertible loan note as a pre-seed before doing an equity raise, which would be a proper seed. Sometimes, depending on the size, it would be called a Series A. I would say that the name of those funding rounds has less and less importance because we see a variety of size and achievements with those first fundings. And so either they come along, actually can substitute for VAs, or either they come slightly afterwards when there is the beginning of a team with the company, there's some first data which support the claims and the original hypothesis, which put a bit more comfort around the story and the investment thesis. And then it's a classic one, which we might discuss further, which is the alchemy that can exist between a founding team and those early stage VCs, and how strong can be the data. Sometimes, but it's rarely the case, but some funds may have the network and money to try and confirm again this type of data with external work, so that they can then move forward with the first investment and becoming part of the cap table.
I would like to go back to a point that you mentioned, that you said that it's becoming more and more interesting for VCs to also come on board via convertible loan in a pre-seed or seed phase. I was absolutely not aware of that. I always thought I can approach a VC once a company has generated sufficient data, has formed a team, and already proven that it can bring, for example, a drug towards the clinical phase 1. Since when does this model exist that VCs are also interested to come aboard?
I see that a lot a lot. Actually, it's still relatively rare, but I see it more and more over the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe one has to check in the US, because maybe this happened as well in the US, more under stealth mode, but whereby one doesn't want to put yet a lot of money on the table, other want to put a valuation, and this money is there to structure the company at creation and make sure that the first key elements can be confirmed. So when I say doing some external confirmatory studies, this can be the case with such money. And then you open it up for a formal equity round. So this is where the valuation will be discussed, negotiated, looking carefully at the cap table, etc. But this is something that I saw in seed funds happening more and more.
That's great news, because I think it's very beneficial to have a VC and the expertise on board very early in the company. What's the model that you're currently working for, Sarova Life Science? So what's the investment model that Sarova uses?
So we are doing both biotech and medtech investment in Europe, but as well with some exposure in North America. For biotech, we are usually quite early stage for first investment. And then, like any VC fund, this might vary over the investment period. The earlier you are in your investment period, when you create a fund, the earlier stage you can go. It's all about an assumption around time to exit, given the fact that the fund usually is closed after 10 to 12 years. And so it can be really even before having a preclinical candidate or a confirmatory in vivo efficacy in a relevant animal model for such preclinical candidates. This can be earlier than that. Medical device, it will depend. Our experience tends to make us believe we would probably invest later stage at what we did before at the investment, and ideally for medtech having already first-in-man data. It's different drivers between both biotech and medtech, and hence a different way to approach first investment for us.
Let's talk a little bit about the life science business model. I learned at the university that actually every company needs a customer. And when I talk with people, especially now that we have this heightened awareness for life science investment with the novel coronavirus, some people say, well, that means we need to build another pharma company because we need to get access to patients. And that actually costs billions. How, for an investor like you, does the life science business model work? How do you develop a company?
There are multiple ways to develop a company. You've got companies which are centered around one or two assets, and companies which are qualified as platform companies, where actually you can address several targets, several indications, and there the way to think about building a company is really different, because out of a platform, what is key is to make sure that you select the right programs you're going to finance and push forward. And selecting the right programs is probably with a twofold objective: further validating the platforms with additional data, and as well having ideally programs which are not just there for proof of principle to then be shelved, but actually programs that are commercially viable and that will be of interest to the large corporations for either partnering or maybe the acquisition of the company. So obviously, it's I would say it's a more daunting task when you have a platform to make sure that you build as well the organization and the internal competencies around some given therapeutic areas, and at various levels, at various stages of development of those programs. When you have one asset, usually it's pretty focused, and it's obviously it's not the same bets and the same way of building company.
How does it work to get in touch with pharma companies to do an M&A deal? I can imagine it's how the process works to bring a product to the patient. But as a VC, how do you get access to the pharma industry?
Actually, those two worlds, VC and pharma industry, have been increasingly in contact in the last 10, 15 years, understanding each other's language, objectives, and understanding why we need each other. And so those pharma companies are easy to access, I would say. They are not in the ivory tower, not understanding what is a VC like, and actually us as well thinking that we don't need pharma and that the startups are always better. Not at all. I mean, those two will communicate at various levels, and actually it's needed because those pharma companies need to have, in a way, a feedback from those startups where we invest from different groups. And actually they talk to various co-investors in the same companies on top of having some management presentations, so they can cross-check the information. And it enables them as well to monitor the progress or not. And for us, it's important because we have two hats very often. We have a hat as a director on the board, and we have the shareholders hat. But in both cases, it's important to make sure that the company is visible to the pharma industry, because it's not because you're the best or you believe you're the best that things will come out of the sky. I mean, a management team needs to make sure that is well known to the pharmaceutical industry, so that when a deal is ripe, actually they don't discover you. They have followed this, there have been interactions, there's a direct connection made between manager. The startup found a champion inside the pharma industry who hopefully will not change by the time the deal can be done. So all of this is kind of step-by-step process, paving the way towards a transaction. So those two worlds talk often on a more or less regular basis. So it can be for a deal, for example, an investment support for a company. But sometimes it happens that as we are meeting dozens, actually hundreds of opportunities, there very often it's the case that we don't have much of a clue yet about an indication or a disorder, and we can give a call sometimes to some pharma colleagues that can help as well to tell us more and maybe point out to us a few interesting academics or clinicians, and sometimes we even reciprocate towards the industry because a lot of those industry are thinking about various strategic moves or reinforcing themselves in the franchise. And very often they are open to hear about who we talk to, what come across, and where is the innovation coming from.
It's a very interesting point that you made before. You said a company should be well known when a deal becomes ripe. This is one of the fears I hear very often when I work as a mentor with scientists who want to found a company. When I tell them, look, guys, you need someone who goes out and speaks with investors and the pharma industry, then they really go back and say, no, we can't do that, because why should pharma buy from us? I mean, they just pick up our idea and develop it themselves. Is this really a just fear, or is this something that you would say people should overcome and should really be open-minded, go out and talk to pharma?
I would answer the following way. If there is a confidential agreement being signed, if the innovation is well protected by patents, this fear should be overcome, because those two parties, startups backed by scientific founders and industry, need to talk. And things don't happen over 24 hours. So things take time. People move from those big pharma organizations into others. Sometimes the startup needs to redo again the exercise of educating, not evangelizing some of the pharma industry guys to what they've been working on before as academics, and now in startup, the more process session to get candidates. So I definitely needs to be overcome. Of course, one can understand the fear if the patent protection is weak or inexistent. Anyone would say, well, then big pharma, if they believe it's a great idea, why don't they put resources onto it and just do it themselves? But this as well is easier said than done, because the pharma industry has got its own budget, reporting, focus, and it's not like every week they're going to put 20 people on one idea because they think it's great and it's an open space with no patent, and try to do it themselves. Not at all. And this is really the difference between a startup and a big pharma industry. The startup is totally focused to progress one idea, a program, a platform, and probably will do it as well, if not better, than in a big pharma organization where on a more or less regular basis you have arbitrage between programs, between business units. One has to defend the budget. I mean, it's a different setting. So even in those cases where, maybe it's super early, it's a great idea, and I'm fearing that the big guys are going to take my idea, I think that it's rarely the case. And then it's up to the scientific founders to disclose what they are comfortable with, and especially not published early before there are the relevant patents written and filed. This is important to note as well. And then later on, as the discussion progresses, as there is more protection involved, then they can open it up a bit more.
That's interesting what you say. I see more and more also with pharma companies that pharma, like Boehringer, for example, with the Research Beyond Borders program, set up programs to support scientists very early, sometimes even before a company is formed. And I also would say, I mean, if there is no patent or if an idea is not strong enough to file a strong patent, it's a question then if the idea really can become a company. So I would not be worried at all. Because
it takes years. It takes years, efforts, millions to make something happen. I mean, it would be known if pharma was a kind of institution that can just seed projects from nearly scratch out of academia and spend all those years and budget. I mean, they are better off actually having us and before maybe families and business money to try and bring forward something which is a bit more validated rather than doing it themselves. And another point is that there's a lot of credibility at stake. So if really a pharma industry, or actually some executives in the pharma industry would not behave properly, that would resonate badly with paint, and it would be known. So people are very cautious about that. It takes years to get to credibility.
Oh yeah.
For people to respect you. It doesn't take much actually to break that down. So this is as well another factor to take into account.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes years to build a reputation, and a few wrong moves and the reputation is gone quite quickly. I know that from the very early stages, so as a business angel, that the world is very dynamic. But I think this is not so really the spot of a VC. The VC world that I got to know over the last 16 years was a little bit more later down the road. Yeah. So between efficacy data in clinics and the preclinical work. In your opinion, when we talk about timing, how long does it take when you start talking with the pharma industry to structure a deal until you get the final signature and the deal really happens?
Well, it's like any transaction. It depends on a couple of factors. Well, actually, more than a couple. The first is the fit between the company, the startup, and the big pharma, and making sure that there is a level of desire to make a deal which is there with the right people interacting. And again, it's all finding the champion inside the pharma industry that will be convinced and will convince its own guys with their internal process that this is the deal to be done. Okay, so this is an utmost requirement. Then it's about alignment of the stars. At some point in time, you feel that everything is ready, and you need to make sure the process is going to be smooth and quick. And this can only be helped if there is a bit of competition. Obviously, if the pharma guys strongly believe that they are the only one really sitting at the negotiation table and they're not going to be taken away, or I would say rather in proper English, that no one will take away this deal from them, but then they will take more time, of course. If they believe that actually there are a few big guys around the table that can offer more and quicker, then it's an incentive to be more quick. So a deal can take, in my experience, anywhere between 2 years or more of monitoring, progress checking, discussions before we really discuss about terms and conditions, to actually 3 or 4 months. And I've heard, not experienced, but I've heard of deals which were actually taking only weeks. But those ones, if you have not been monitoring the company before, I would be very cautious about them. But usually they never say how quick it was and why. Sometimes they don't even say how much.
Yeah, the world changed a little bit with the Corona crisis. I also heard from deals that within 6 weeks they were signed, but I'm pretty sure, as you say, that the pharma company already had the target on the monitor for a longer period of time. Yeah. Talking about timing and risk, you as a VC invest in assets before the pharma company picks them up. When I invest on the stock market, I mean, I get a lot of information, a lot of data. And of course, I mean, investment is always risky, but with listed companies, it's a little bit narrowed down. How is the risk in the life science industry at the stage of companies when you invest? How do you handle that?
So the risk assessment, I mean, depending on the fund and depending on the individual, the investors in this fund, you've got very different ways of doing stuff. There are 2 key aspects to tackle and to investigate. It's the team you're talking to, How appropriate have there been so far in terms of where they stand with the programs, what data have been generated by who, and the quality of it, and the team, is the team fit for purpose for the next coming 2 to 3 years, which is generally the scope of a financing round that you are contemplating. Okay, so first thing in an analysis is to make sure that you are comfortable with this team, and if there need to be maybe additions, that they are in agreement with you as to what the next steps are and what type of profile they need to embark to make sure that they can execute and deliver on the plan. Okay, and there is some reciprocity here. I always tell the management teams I meet before an investment, make sure that if you have the possibility, you choose the VCs, and especially the VC representative that you're going to embark with. Because it's not only money, you're going to have on your governance, on the board of your company, going to have those VCs being represented, and you need to make sure that on a one-to-one basis, the discussion, the interaction is going well. Well doesn't mean that it's just yes man saying yes to everything, but that there is a constructive relationship, okay, where everyone can hear challenging views and try to do the best for the company and make informed decisions. But it's not only on a one-to-one basis, because you've got a bench of investors reps on the board. You've got as well independent directors. So all of this needs to be oiled well enough so that it can be really going well moving forward. It's like a bit of a short-term wedding, and we want it to be. So the human aspect is very important, very important. You can have the best programs, the best data. If a team cannot deliver, or if worse, there's a bad chemistry at a governance level with perhaps wrong decisions being made, whatever the reasons, then it's going to be tough. And then there is something which is much more technical, much more analytical, which is the data. Here, usually, the VC funds will likely find relevant independent experts outside, will mandate them to look over their shoulders and check out if the data is strong enough, if the plan is the right one according to the positioning, if there is nothing competition that might be a paradigm shift and that will totally change the way the company needs, the direction it needs to go into. So this is the analytical side, which is, I would say, maybe easiest in a way. Even if it can get very complex, it's still based on data, hypothesis, and you can talk to a lot of different people, highly relevant, highly skilled, to try and understand exactly what's going on and if the hypotheses of the company are the right ones or if we need to change them. And this is where as well it needs to be a constructive exchange. It's not about who is right or wrong, it's to make sure that already collectively, before even the event is made, we can talk openly and decide really what is best. Sometimes the BP is good enough, so it's all a matter of execution. Sometimes it needs to be adapted. And so at the end of the day, you've got a more clear picture as to where the level of risks are, what are the risk mitigation factors, and according to your fund, I would say, objectives in building the portfolio of investees, and as well with what you and your colleagues at your investment committee are more comfortable with or not, the deal will happen or will not. And if a deal is not happening, it's not that the door is closed forever, it's just that, well, okay, there have been a few red flags or a few things that eventually are not good enough for us. Let's take progress or let's further discuss. And
you said the human factor is very important when you decide upon investing in a company. When I look at the academic side, there is mostly a lot of data. And when you say the human factor and the team is important, I think you're not talking about the academic team. I think you're talking about the development team, so that you want to see the right skill set.
Depends. Sometimes you've got scientific founders who are CEO and CSO and CTO, having the C status, which is fine. But obviously, this is where you need to make sure, well, at least this is my point of view, although investors might act and think differently. But you need to make sure that those guys understand what the game is all about. And that developing, designing and executing studies with an academic objective in mind to further explore mechanism of action, pharmacology, is really different compared to trying to select for preclinical candidates, which will later be drug candidates getting into healthy volunteers and thereafter patients. So it's a different way of thinking, of anticipating, and this is where those interactions before an investment are very important, because if the scientific founders believe they know it all and better than anyone else, even in areas like regulatory, clinical, or even preclinical animal talks where they never went into, this is going to be a bit of an issue. Okay, if they say, you know what, we are very good at this level. Yes, we like to be kept as CEO, CSO, CTO. We'll see how things evolve, but obviously we will need to bring in a translational person, someone more versed in CMC, maybe have earlier than expected some people with a clinical and regulatory background. Perfect. I mean, I'm not the type of VCs who would say, you scientific founders do nothing but how to be put in an advisory seat and we'll have a brand new team. No, not necessarily the case. But it's true that this is where you take a bit of a bet. Which is, well, are the science going to evolve the way we think they can? And they say there are we going to meet some issues later on?
Well, what I would be interested in, I think when people think about investors, mostly they think about retail investors, because it's quite simple and easy today to invest on the stock market in listed companies, and the process is straightforward. I can rely on analysis that I find on the internet. I can almost not talk with the CEO or with any person in the company, because it's just the investment is too small. And once the investment is done, there is usual quarterly reports, annual reports. How is it in the VC world? How much is a VC engaged in the operations, or is a VC similar to a retail investor in handling the investment process?
No, it's well, actually, again, you have different VCs, different VC funds. Okay, but it's nearly obvious that a VC fund will do much more work than reading a few reports around the disease and just putting a bit of money and waiting for board meetings to happen, a shareholder meeting every year, and having a nice chat with the company when you can. It goes much more in depth. It's a lot of publication reading. It's a lot of discussions with experts from the company and actually outside of the company, again, in the process. So it's really a two different way of acting. And on the retail market, in public, there's a lot of speculation, and the reports you can find usually are in a way biased, especially in Europe. I can allude more to that, but just look at the number of buy that are being put on companies versus neutral or sell. You will maybe think that something is odd. Either they're all great, either there is something that's not normal. Okay, so yeah, it's two different way of approaching companies, approaching investment business, and when you are retail investors on stock market, you can play around, buy one day, sell the other day. There's some liquidity, or there should be. As an institutional VC in a privately held company, you are there for years, going through the tough times with the management, your co-investors, and other fellow board members to try and help go through those hard times, find solutions, and move it to the next steps. It's totally different.
One advice I got, it was years ago. So I heard the story, when a company needs money, it's the only time when they engage with VCs. So they put basically the story on the market for a certain time period, and usually 3 or 4 weeks later, the money is on the bank account. I never saw this, so in 16 years.
For those that can see my face on video, I think they got my reaction. No, it really happens like that in privately held companies. Usually, there have been more or less regular talks with various VCs at various conferences, just to provide them with some update, under or not confidentiality, depending how the relationship went before, to what point. And then when really the company is ready, in an ideal world, they will have already aligned investors, actually selecting the ones that make more sense to them, to reach them out this time around formally for fundraising. And this is where they're trying to put in place a process that is not going to take ages, but you don't do it 3 months before you're running out of cash. Okay. More and more, you start to do it maybe a year before, because it can take as long as a year to get the money in and the closing done. It can be pretty painful.
Now I see it absolutely the same way, and I also had the feeling that, as you said, with the pharma company, it also makes sense to reach out to VC before a company needs money, to just have this initial get to know phase and to see if the team is the right fit with the VC, and also the other way around. You said the human factor is very important.
Yes.
How much time does Sarovar take to get to know the people, actually? Do we talk about days or more on the month side?
No, it's months, even more than that. I mean, some companies we monitor over years, and as far as I'm concerned, because I cannot talk necessarily for all my colleagues, my fellow investors in other funds, but as far as I'm concerned, it happens that even if a company is not fit yet for an investment from our fund, I keep in touch on a regular basis because they want me as well to provide some genuine feedback as to what they think and the data they have, and it goes both ways. It's one feedback, one opinion among others, but at least hopefully it's valuable to them, and it's as well keeping the relationship with an investor to make sure that at the next stage, maybe here it will be the right moment for to consider an investment. But the human factor is very important, and sometimes, and this is where startups need to keep that in mind as well. We are quite busy receiving nearly every day some new investment opportunities. At Sarova, we're trying to be quick in saying, yes, let's organize a first presentation formally to go through this deck, or thank you, but doesn't fit what we're looking for now, or not yet of interest because of such and such, but we're trying to have such a feedback. Because it's very difficult for a startup not to receive a feedback or to hope for actually something positive just because there's no feedback. This is not the right thing to do. Having said that, VCs are pretty busy, and sometimes yes, things slip. So this relationship is ongoing always.
To get a little bit better understanding of the other side of the negotiation table, the VC table, out of interest, how many deals do you see? How many potential deals do you see in a year?
So for Sarova, I think we are at 450, 500 every year. Deals
Really?
which come to us or
Yeah.
that been an interest in some area from time to times, or just because we looked into what maybe the industry has been doing, what publications we've read, or maybe as well from discussions with fellow co-investors from the portfolio of what they are interested in. You see, it's various sources, proactive or reactive. So there's a lot coming. It can come directly to us because we've got a website which is where we are very easily accessible, or through conferences or through the recommendation of someone. I would say that out of this, probably a third can make sense. And this is where we will likely have an hour presentation to start with. And so, yeah, and this is what I wanted to say before, which escaped my mind. What is important is this first hour. This is quite critical because this is where we will have a sense if the equity story, the investment thesis is well presented, well articulated, and if we have a clear view as to what's going on and where they want to go, or if it's fuzzy, confusing. When we ask questions, the answers are not necessarily straight. Data doesn't look that solid. You see, that hour is very important, very important. And so it's not a matter of just putting together a quick deck and improvising by bringing 6 people to discuss with the VC. Actually, the startup needs to rehearse and make sure that in 1 hour, the key takeaway messages are clear. Because if it's not, guess what? Then in the next 2 or 3 hours, I will have another presentation which might be more attractive to me or to my colleague, because usually at Sarovar, very often we're 2 on a presentation. It's not only one guy hearing whatever you want to hear or do. And if this next one is more attractive, this is the one we will discuss the next morning with our guys to say, oh, okay, this is the latest that we went through, and this one, we're going to dig into it. The others, probably not. You see? So for us, it's always an arbitration. And this is, in my view, the most tricky, which is to make sure we can prioritize early on our time on what really can make an investment happen to closing. Because our time is super limited. We don't have dozens of people in the VC fund. It's just a few investors. And it's only 24 hours in a day. And therefore, if you spend days and nights on a deal that eventually doesn't come to fruition, it's days and nights that you didn't spend on something else, which would have been more productive, you see. So we were super careful about that. So this first interaction is really important.
I see that we have a question from the audience, from Christine Bernard. Let's see if she's here, then I can hand her the microphone.
I can read it as well.
Yeah. So how do you perceive in companies having more consultants than employment? How does this weight for VCs investments?
It depends at which stage they are, but I would say that usually advisors are not payers. So a full-time employee obviously is more vested and bought more into the story of the company, and its salary and later valuation outcome of the shares you can have in the company is more important than an advisor. But sometimes, because the company is young, it often happens that there are more advisors than managers. And the other situation is where you have those virtual or semi-virtual structure to try and avoid high fixed costs. This is particularly true with one asset companies. And this makes sense as well. You don't need a little army to try and develop one program, especially if it's a program that is entering the clinic. So you need to make sure that this situation and the balance between internal people versus external advisors is well weighed and appropriate for the stage where the company is and for what it's doing. I mean, if you tell me it's a 2-man persons for a huge platform, and you have 30 advisors, for example, I would be a bit scared about that. You see?
That's interesting. Bruno, another question when I look at the process. So you get a lot of deals on your table and you have a limited amount of time in a year.
Yeah.
There is this pitch deck term that I think everybody in the startup world meanwhile is familiar with. What information flow would you like to see from a company so that the company stands out of the crowd, that it's not comes across as messy?
In this first interaction?
In this first interaction, the pitch deck.
So there are 2 things. There are things which are going to be found in the deck and things which are going to be discussed. What I like to hear, and maybe I kept being a kid in an adult body, is to hear a story. I like to hear stories. See, and not bedtime story, obviously. So I like to understand the background.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, exactly. But I like to understand the background of the company, where the founders come from, how they met, how they come up with the idea, who helped structuring the first steps of the company, and maybe how to better structure the science, where the publications are coming from. This is very important because it's years and years of hard labor and of actually human relationships that I was not part of, and which explains a lot. And actually, it explains as well very often the DNA of the company. And this is where I'm always intrigued to hear about those stories, because then I have a better feel already as to who, in a way, I'm facing over a conference call or video conf, and better understand maybe how things have been structured. Then it's about the data generated. And of course, there is non-confidentiality aspects, and all is to be told, it can be said and plot, but this is where I need to see some data. A pitch where I have no data, I mean, it's going to be hard to be convinced. I need something there, okay? And data which has been generated from the company or close collaborators in relation to the program of the platform, not data which I can still see from that's coming from a different company, a different world, because there's nothing to do with what the company is working on, but just trying to say it's validated, so we are validated. Not the same thing, you see? And then it's forward-looking statement. Okay, from where you are, where do you want to go and why? And then naturally, you end up with discussions and needs, and you've got in an hour 15, a first good understanding of where the company is coming from, where it is, where it wants to go, and if actually it's well articulated and it makes sense for you to take more time, and this time sign maybe an NDA and get more into the granularity to check what you heard and more.
So it really means as a company, taking your time, sitting down, thinking about how to develop a compelling storytelling. Usually when I talk with scientists, I see a lot of data, but they really miss that storytelling component out.
Yeah.
So you really, if I got it right, you really recommend to any company who reaches out to VCs to really sit down and do the homework first before sending just a bunch of data over.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I would be even maybe a bit more cynical. Well, in a sense, first not cynical and then cynical. The first maybe suggestion I would have is to tell them, well, if you have some early investors, business angels that supported you, try first the pitch on them. Use them. Check out how clear it is. Because if they get it right and they believe it's clear, well, they know the story, it's already a good thought. If it's not the case, then it means you get something wrong. Okay? And then the cynical suggestion, which is, well, you've got a few thousands of investors that you can reach out to. Some of them probably are not a fit anyway, for various reasons. You know what? Test the water with them first. And see how the reaction goes. And this is where, if there's anything obvious that is really not right, you should see it and adapt accordingly to always enhance, improve your deck and your pitch.
At the end of the pitch, usually, as you said, there is the use of proceeds or the amount of money a company tries to raise, and giving also some reasons. From one of my mentees, I heard that during a pitch, the investor asked the CEO of the company and say, okay, you need 3 million euros. Let's just assume I give you 30 million euros. What would you do? And the mentee said, what is the right answer to that question? What's your opinion on that?
I mean, maybe one reason was that this VC had lots of cash to deploy, and a 3 million ticket was not making any sense. So maybe as well it is perhaps something that would have been known by the startups before going to the VC, just to keep in mind. Then if it's just a kind of tricky question asked by the VC, I mean, this is where the startups needs, even though they don't have necessarily and obviously rarely the internal competency, to check out really where they will be over 5 years down the road and how much money they will need, they need to have at on that. So imagine a company just starting some in vitro study to try and test the pharmacology hypothesis. Obviously, they don't need 30 millions to try and get to in vivo proof of concept. Okay, so 3 million is largely enough with a bit of tox data. But to that question, it means, oh yes, of course, we have 30 millions. It means that we go into GLP tox into animal species. It means we produce the supply for the clinical trials. It means that actually we might want to run a few hypotheses or investigations in relevant animal models. And then as well, it's all about planning to be IND ready and starting a clinical trial, which means hiring people, getting to know the sites where we're going to enroll patients, etc. So if there is a justification, and obviously it shows to the VC that, oh, okay, they can see just beyond the next 12 months and those 3 million, they know what is the end game. Of course, no one has a crystal ball as 20, 30, 50, and how it will go, you see. But this is, I would say this is what the startup can answer. And not being just stuck dry and not understanding what to expect.
That's true. So let's just assume, let's go a little bit further on this journey, and let's assume we got the first bit right. We also got the first hour right, and Sarova decides to invest in any company. The investment is not done then. So what is the aftermath that the VC has with the company once the investment is done? What has a life science entrepreneur to expect?
Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, before I put a term sheet on the table, usually if I'm acting as a lead or a co-lead, I would have done some technical due diligence with external experts before. Because who am I to say if the data I'm being shown and the positioning I'm being told is the right one and the best? So I need external people to go over my shoulders at a point where I heard and interacted enough to believe I understand what's going on and to ask the relevant questions to my expert as well. So it's only when I have the report, which is substantive and supportive enough, that we will enter into a term sheet. In a classic world, I would say the term sheet will have, for me, will be quite detailed. It's not just a one-pager, it's a few pages, okay? Taking most of the clauses that will be found in the final legals, and it will be pending of something obvious, which is my investment decision. Okay, it has the eventual yes or no decision. It's not me making the decision; it's a partnership. Then, obviously, the situation of the company. By the time we decide with my IC to go forward and wire the money, there shouldn't be any major adverse event. The famous back close that's happening, which will just put everything in doubt at the last minute. It happened in the past, unfortunately. Just think about the COVID-19 situation. Okay, maybe this created serious issues in some cases. And then there is a classic, I would say, large expense due diligence that still needs to be done, which is the financial audit. It's more or less important depending upon how complex, how old is the company you invest into. So it's legal and financial due diligence. There is usually a freedom to operate analysis and IP assessment, which is FTO plus patentability, which is pretty key. Because if we end up discovering that actually the patents are weak or being heavily challenged, actually that you are probably infringing on other people's business and patents, this is going to be an issue. And if this is clear, then yes, the lawyers will have been engaged, and you will have move into legals. Then legals can take some time, depending on how detailed is the term sheet, and sometimes people have double thoughts. They didn't think carefully about it when we discussed the term sheet. They want to go back on that. There are a few things that can be necessarily detailed in the term sheet, so this can take a bit of time.
So when I calculate the time roughly, I would say we are talking about a year from the first contact, going over the term sheet phase, then the detailed due diligence phases.
No, less than that. I mean, you can't. It depends on the outcome of those experts I would mandate, obviously, because the more red flag, the more questions, the more time we need from them to interact with the company and get some reassuring answers. But in an ideal situation, I will probably take 3 months from the first interaction down to having the relevant expert reports. If they are free, if they could be mandated on time, it's as well if, because they're not waiting for you, those experts, they have things to do as well. Then, if the term sheet is clear and there's no much negotiation, it's just a matter of weeks to sign it. And then you've got maybe another 2 to 3 months to think to finalize the due diligence before and get the legals done so that everything is set to be wired and for the new story to start. So it could be 5-6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's quicker to do an extension. Because in the case of an extension of a previous round, you're piggybacking on all the legals. You don't have to rewrite all the legal jurisdictions. And as you know better than me, in some jurisdictions as well, it can be pretty painful to have to go to the notary to get translations done, get it all approved, stamped in languages. Sometimes it's a nightmare, and this can delay process. So I'm not even talking about those situations.
Mm-hmm. So let's assume further that we got everything right and Sarova is happy to sign the contract and wire the money. Does that mean then job is done, the company can work for the next 2 or 3 years to reach the promised value inflection points, and that's the first time when the company re-engages with Sarovar, claiming the next money, or is there something? What is the expectation? That
no, it's the beginning of a new relationship whereby you will have new investors sitting on your board. You will have I would say on average bi-monthly board meetings. In between board meetings, you will probably
bi-monthly.
Bi-monthly,
so
yeah.
Every 2 months.
Yeah, it's about the rhythm of those board meetings. Maybe there will be subcommittees as well on some given topic that will need additional work. In between, you can have informal calls, meetings to discuss some situations. When there's a close relationship between management and the investor that act as a sparring partner and bounce off ideas of him or her. So no, it's the beginning of multiple face-to-face or phone calls, and the companies shouldn't feel challenged or threatened by that at all. I mean, obviously, when they're trying to access VC money, it's not only for the money; it's as well for the experience, for the fit between individuals, and to make sure they have the required guidance and help as well. One thing that you asked, which I think I only partly, if not until at all, earlier you mentioned about how deep are you in the operations? Actually, my take is very simple. Even if I had been an industry operative in biotech or pharma, whatever you want to name it, there's a red line to cross, which is I'm not a manager.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm not there to manage people of the startup. I'm not there on a daily basis. I'm not there to make decisions on my own for the company. Not at all. Okay, I'm there to try and ask the relevant questions, try and help and find the relevant solutions when problems are anticipated or happen. Okay, and this needs to be done collectively. This is important.
Mm-hmm.
So this is pretty key, because at the end of the day, an investor is betting on the team, and it's up to the team then to execute and be transparent and honest enough to raise the hand when they have problems. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The issue that might happen is twofold. When you have an investor that actually believes he or she can do better than the team and wants to make a decision or acts on behalf of the company, well, you don't have that type of mandate. Okay. Or actually the other way around as well, where the management team actually is keeping its cards close to the chest and don't want to admit there are issues, hoping to solve them before it's being seen. This is really going in the wrong direction, and you can be sure that it's going to fly back into everyone's face at some point, And the later it happens, the worse it's going to be. This is going to be a wreck. Damages will be done, and this is where there's going to be a difference.
So it basically, your recommendation is open communication. So
yes.
Look at the human factor initially before approaching investors.
Yeah.
Does the founding team really feel comfortable with the personalities of the investor and vice versa? And once the investment it's done, it's everything about honest and open communication.
Exactly. It's all about building trust. You see, I mean, in some situations, the guys will have known each other from a previous investment experience or from a previous world, or through maybe as well from connections. So that's put more reassurance and confidence. Other than that, it's professional interactions, monitoring a company until the point where you invest. But still, you didn't have to go through yet the tough moments together and have to sweat together, thinking that maybe the stake of the program or even the company might be at risk, and how do we answer that? Okay, this is going to be the key event, the key proof that you can work together. And so it's all about building trust and making sure that there is informed decision making. And then obviously, if it ends up being that decision, so be it. But it's very important. It's again all about the human factor here.
So let's assume further we got everything right. We developed the company further. The drug gets great efficacy data in the clinic, and we also have a pharma company that is willing to sign a license deal but not acquire the company. HOOKIPA Pharma, for example, it's an Austrian company, decided to do an IPO at the Nasdaq. What relevance has an IPO to a VC like you in this game?
IPO is not an exit for VC. It's a refinancing first. It can become an exit once the lockup period, when our pre-IPO shares are locked, is over, and assuming there is some liquidity and some demand for us. Okay, so an IPO is really a refinancing event, and you can find a situation of a dual track process where the company actually engage advisor both for IPO and M&A track. And this is interesting because the IPO route means for the potential acquirer that, well, they better hurry up before IPO to acquire the company, because maybe later on it's going to be more difficult and more expensive. And at the same time, the IPO process is there to ensure that you are not depending upon such a licensing deal to keep on funding the company. See, so it puts the company in a better negotiating position as well. So that's quite important. But easier said than done. An IPO is not done just because you decide it. There are market conditions, and then again, once you become public, it's a different story. Okay, different rules, and very often managers of privately held companies don't foresee well how tough and demanding becoming public will be. And it's really a different game and different people you will have to face, and you will even regret your VC investors and sometimes provided some hard moment to you and challenging questions.
So I didn't do any statistics, but just from my personal observations, I see from European companies in the life science industry, I see a lot of IPOs in the United States on the Nasdaq, and I'm aware of one IPO in Europe in the last 3 years. It was in Austria, Marinomed. Where do you see, what are the reasons why so many companies decide to go to the United States, in your opinion?
So in the last year, there have been more than that IPO in the biotech and medtech world in Europe, thank God. But the issue with Europe is that it's still very spread over in between countries. And so usually a French company will go to French next, a British company will think about AIM or maybe NSC. Then you've got the Amsterdam Exchange, so and obviously in each of those stock markets in Europe, you don't have the breadth and depth that you can find in the investor base and money available, as well valuation you can expect as on Nasdaq. And this is why for a few years now, companies have been going either in a two-step process, i.e. first European IPO with then a follow-on and a listing and an offering of shares on NASDAQ or directly to NASDAQ, because it is on NASDAQ that you will find not only special investors, which can be helpful as well as a validated trading system and helpful maybe as well. You find the crossover investors, which are the guys that are going to bring a lot of money before the IPO and paving the way towards the IPO, pressuring IPO. So this is all the reasons why a lot of companies are now eyeing a NASDAQ IPO and not anymore an IPO on their own stock market. The other thing is about liquidity, and this is both for well, actually, it's for all shareholders of those European companies, including us, these investors, historic investors. I mean, at the end of the day, you need to trade. Because if you stay in a company for years, you're not going to make any realization from any exit. Okay, you need to find liquidity on a daily basis or a good enough interest for at least block trades, and sometimes it's tough on European market. So for a company to raise a lot of cash at nice valuations with IPO liquidity, unfortunately, still, it's been going on for years and years and years. Yes, the US and NASDAQ is somehow better. Okay, but then not everyone is fit to go to NASDAQ. And sometimes it's perfectly reasonable to stay European and to keep having an IPO listing and make the best out of it. You see? It's not the ultimate objective that any company should reach. And again, there are many constraints, it's a different game. And just ask the question to those European managers of having gone IPO on NASDAQ. I can tell you, take a picture of them before and a few years after NASDAQ listing, you will see physically a change.
Yeah, I worked in listed companies. I completely agree. It's a different game. It's a totally different game.
It's tough.
Yeah. Bruno, we are coming to the end of today's episode. I would like to ask one final question.
Sure.
So let's assume you have a time machine and you can go back into the past and meet your younger self. Yeah. So at the time when you finished school, what is the most important advice you would like to give to your younger self with all the experience you gained over years?
I think it would be one just for a career path, which is understand the organization you're working for, the people you're working for or with, because it is as important as what you bring. So managing your own career needs to be thought of carefully, and largely it is the understanding of the organization, how things work, what are people's agendas and interests, to make sure that you're not surprised by some decisions, or you're not the one actually being hit by such decisions a bit surprisingly. Okay. Yeah, this is what I would give as an advice.
Bruno, thank you very much for your time and your insights. I wish you all the best at Sarovar Life Science and a lot of nice and successful exits.
Thanks for the invitation, Christian.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Please share the podcast and make sure you've subscribed. Have a great day.